Turtle, and today we're going to be talking about all of the books that have made me cry. So I'm going to be honest, I am not really a book crier. It takes a lot, and I mean a lot, for a book to actually make me cry. So I will say, after the first book that made me cry, which we'll get to in a second, I am more like prone to it now, because I definitely have cried while reading more frequently after that like first book, which was only like 3 years ago, 2 years ago? It was 2016. It was March 2016. There also usually has to be like certain conditions, or I won't show any emotion if I'm like out in public or something. So there usually has to be certain conditions or I won't cry. There will be mild spoilers in this video, but I will warn you each time, so you can mute for a few seconds if you haven't read the book yet that I'm talking about. So the first book that ever really made me cry was Lady Midnight by Cassandra Clare. This is still to this day one of my favorite books. And part of it I think is because it made me so emotional, but I'm not really sure why this one, out of all of the books I've read before this one, like why this one was the one that kind of got all of this started. So yeah, this came out in March 2016. It came out actually the week that I was on spring break. So I read this whole thing, this giant book, in like 3 days. And the part that made me cry is the part towards the end when Jem tells Emma about the Parabatai curse and like the consequences of it and everything. And like, I don't know why that section hit me so hard, because it's not like anybody died, it's not like something like terrible thing happened or anything, but like, I don't know, I just, for some reason like reading it, I just felt like so trapped and overwhelmed, and I was just like, I don't know how they're gonna get around this. And I don't know, I just lost it. And it was like the bad kind of crying too, like the hyperventilating, like you can't breathe, ugly kind of crying. So it was with this book that I kind of figured out that there were like certain conditions that I had to have to be able to cry while reading. And it's not always the same for every book, but a lot of the times it is. One of them is that I have to be alone. I can't be in public. Like I said earlier, I won't show emotion. Like terrible things could be happening and I just nothing, because I'm aware of what's going on around me, which is why I don't really like to read out in public. Another one is that it has to be kind of like in the middle of the night and dark, which seems weird, but I finished this book at like 2 a.m. and my lights were off except for like my bed light lamp thing, and like I was so exhausted, but I was just like, I gotta keep going. And so I think that also kind of like made me drop my guard because I was so tired. I still remember like that moment reading it and like having that hyperventilating kind of cry at like 2 a.m. and like trying to contain myself and be quiet so I didn't wake up anybody else. It was bad. The second book that made me cry, which was almost an entire year later, was Passenger by Alexandra Bracken. This wasn't like as bad of a cry as Lady Midnight. I don't think anything has been as bad as Lady Midnight, because that was, oh. All I have to say is chapter 19. Chapter 19 got me, and it still gets me because I've read that book more than once, and like, I don't usually remember chapter numbers, but I remember that chapter. I'm just like, chapter 19 was so emotional and it just really got to me. So mild spoilers if you haven't read it. So if you want to know without like having to go look it up, it's the chapter when Nicholas is sick and he tells Etta to like go on without him because he thinks he's not gonna make it, and I don't know, which like wording it like that kind of makes it sound cliche, but it wasn't, and it was just a really intense and emotional chapter. And because like the thing with like the Passenger duology is like I am really attached to those characters, and so it was just an emotional time. Okay, next is Wayfarer by Alexandra Bracken, which is the sequel to Passenger. This one got me too. In this one, it was the very last chapter that got me, not the epilogue, but the last chapter, which is like 1 year later from the rest of the book. It just, the whole thing with Etta's concert, and both of her parents came and she sees them after like thinking for a year that they were either dead or trapped in their own original timeline, And so that's like, that's not what made me cry though. That like was getting me emotional, and I was just like, okay, okay. But then what really got me is like when there's like that line where she sees this movement from the back of the auditorium, and like you know that it's Nicholas. And then when it like confirms that it really is him, I just had this thought pop into my head where I was just like, he finally got to see her play. And that I just broke down after that, because like it was kind of like this running thing throughout both of the books that he had never actually heard her play the violin. And so I just had that moment where I was like, he's finally getting to hear her. And I lost it. I'm also pretty sure I finished this book in the middle of the night too, which would explain the sobbings. Next, I'm going to talk about Rite of Rejection by Sarah Negovich. I've talked about this book so much. I love it. It's so good. But the only time it's made me cry is this most recent time I've read it, which was the third time. I'm not sure why exactly this was the time instead of like the first time when I was living it the first time and I didn't know what was coming next. But also I did finish it in the middle of the night after reading the second half of the book all in one day. So, but there is like a scene kind of towards the end of the book, and it just hit me so hard for some reason, because I was so into the book, and I just like imagined myself in that same situation, and I couldn't imagine going through what the characters were going through in that scene. And just like being so in the book and like feeling what they were feeling, and it was just a lot. Next, I'm going to talk about The Retribution of Mara Dyer. This is the last book in the Mara Dyer trilogy. So I'm just gonna say the last 200 pages of this book was a roller coaster of emotions. I would be like hysterically crying, and then the next second I'm just like laughing, and I was just a mess reading this. And this is actually one of the exceptions to my like middle of the night condition, because this was like during the day. It was like afternoon, I was just in my room and I was feeling all the things. Okay, so spoilers. The thing, like I said, the whole last chunk of the book was just like up and down and up and down. But the part that like definitely got me the most was when Mara asks Noah to kill her and to like make everything okay again and to fix her and make her better, because it was like calling back to the first book when he was like, you're not broken, and so that got me too. And like Noah makes her say that it's not her fault and like none of it was her fault, and the whole scene is just so agonizingly slow and drawn out, but like in such a beautiful and painful way. I don't know how to explain it, but I was a mess. It was such a mess. I read this book a second time too, and I was also a mess, so it's good times. The last book I'm going to talk about is Eliza and Her Monsters by Francesca Zappia. I read this for Booktubeathon. I think it was around like day 4 or 5, somewhere in like the middle of the week. So I was already just kind of generally exhausted, because Booktubeathon is exhausting. And the crying that came from this book was more like from the fact that I related to this book so much, and it was more of just like tearing up kind of crying, not like just like endless tears like late midnight or something. It wasn't like that, but it did make me tear up. And the main character has anxiety, and I do too, and I just related to it so much. And there were like some of the passages in the book, like I still remember reading that and being like, yes, that is what it feels like. And like it was just so beautifully written. I just loved every second of this book, and there were just parts that just got to me because of how much I related to it. If you watch my Booktubeathon vlog, you can actually see me being all flustered and emotional like literally seconds after finishing this book. I just finished Eliza and Her Monsters, and I am actually a mess right now. Like, seriously, the number of times I cried reading this book is ridiculous. It was so good, and oh my god, I just want to like sit here and read the whole thing again, honestly. So yeah, that's my experience with books and crying. I'm sure there's more books that have made me like tear up and stuff or shed a few tears, but these are the ones that like really stuck out in my mind. I will say though, I kind of like that books can make me have that kind of reaction. Like whenever I feel that emotional, towards a book, it kind of makes me like weirdly happy in a way, because I'm just like, I care about this world and these characters so much that it's giving me this reaction. So it almost like, it makes me love the book that much more. Yeah, so let me know if you are a book crier, or if you are one of the people who rarely cries. Do you have any certain conditions too? And what are some of the books that have made you cry? That's gonna be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe.